Morning's early. Well, heading up there, it's nothing to do with it. It's not this meeting, 5 minutes.
I can leave here and go straight to work afterwards.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to get some sleep tonight. I gotta be with Jasper tomorrow night. How long the drive is on? But don't get pulled over. It's not too far. Okay, I think we have the problem solved, so sorry for the interruption, and Clayton Kitlitz, you are up.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor Chenard and our crack IT team for getting us back up and running. So I'm gonna start from the top. So we're here tonight to go through the feedback that was received during the April 8th public hearing, which we heard submissions with respect to the draft land use bylaw number 2296. There's a number of different packets in your package. The one we're going to focus on tonight for the most part is the feedback log. Becky Sobey and Laura Clark are here with us from Urban Systems Online, and they're going to go through the presentation, and then Ms. Darling and I will be here to supplement and help answer any questions that council may have as we go through. We're going to go through each item in the log one by one. All of them, except for the handful that are in the briefing note, have some recommendations. We're just basically check to see if council okay with the recommendation. If not, we'll be looking for other direction or options that council would like us to pursue. In terms of presentation, I just want to put a caveat out there that because of the way when we started to build the presentation, the log was just sort of taken as we read through the feedback, but we've organized the presentation in groupings to tackle the administrative stuff first and send residential to commercial to others. So it's not going to match up exactly like the log, but we have included log reference numbers in each slide. So if you wanted to go back to the log, that'll put you back there. So with that, fingers crossed, hopefully Ms. Sobey and Ms. Clark can now join in and walk us through the presentation.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yay, that's awesome. Hello, my name is Becky, as Mr. Kitlitz had mentioned. I'm going to start us off tonight with the presentation. A few just housekeeping or some setting expectations for sort of how we're going to go through additional to what was mentioned already. The PowerPoint will go through each item on the log. We'll provide a brief description of the feedback that was heard, or in other cases, the revisions that were proposed based on administrative review. And then we'll go through our process in addressing some of those, some of the input that was received, and then provide a recommendation. And in some cases, there's some options for discussion. And then, yeah, the log, if you want to follow along, there's the little log numbers on the top corners of the presentation. Okay, so we're going to start off with the administrative changes. And what we mean by this is those changes that we feel are administrative in nature. So we'll start there. The first one that we have is a proposed recommendation for wording in the Highway 16 overlay. The reason being is right now it's the verbiage mentions visible from. So the overlay regulation applies to the development or redevelopment of all lots that are visible from the highway. That is a challenging statement to interpret. So we are recommending a change that allows it to be a bit easier to interpret and doesn't require a map. So that was part of the change request as well. So the recommendation is to change the wording to the overlay regulation applies to the development or redevelopment of all lots that are located adjacent to Highway 16 at the discretion of the development authority. So we'll pause and we'll have discussion if there's anything that Mr. Kitlitz wants to add, but also just an opportunity for questions or comments from council.
Okay, if there's any council members have a question on this? Nope, then we are good to go.
Okay. So I think another piece to just clarify, if there are no questions, I think we understand that council is on board with the recommendation. I think that just want to make sure that we clarify that.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, so the next little section is specific to residential districts. The first one up is a graphic to define the boundary of the Glenwood neighborhood. And this is really dependent on discussion that will come later on. So we don't need to pause necessarily on this slide. We recognize that this is brought up in the log in multiple areas, but we will spend more time dedicated to this later on as it's outlined in the briefing note. Next is a rear yard setback correction. The reason for this is to make sure that we're consistent with our regulations without. So in this case, we had noticed that the rear yard setback, it only includes a rear yard setback for those that have the rear lane access garage. So we need to make sure that we're providing setback requirements for all other cases. So that's the recommendation today.
okay, I believe there's any questions on this from council? Nope, then carry on, please.
Okay. Similar nature in the manufactured home district and in the R2, the districts that speak to manufactured home regulations, there's some inconsistencies with the maximum height that we have. So the recommendation is to have the 6 meters throughout. So that would just mean updating the manufactured home district and the residential or the R2 residential general to make sure that those are consistently mentioning the 6 meters. Any questions?
Council, any questions? Nope, carry on, please.
Perfect. Similar, there was an error around setbacks and height in the R2 general residential district. So the height just needs to be updated to accurately reflect the maximum heights throughout the bylaw. I think it kind of got mixed with the rear yard setback. And then similar to the other one that we saw previously, to make sure that additional to the provision for rear yard setback for the rear lane, we need an option for all other cases as well too. So that's what's being proposed.
Okay, carry on. I don't believe we have any questions on this one as well.
Okay, for this one, there were just some concerns or realization that the current lot width minimum needs to be adjusted to better accommodate sort of a range of housing footprints. So there's a proposal to update the table within the R2 district to change the lot width minimum for single detached dwelling to read 11 meters for the interior and then 14 meters for a corner lot.
I think, anyone have questions? Nope, carry on, please.
Okay. Another correction, so we have similar to the one we mentioned before, we just want to make sure that the tables here are consistent throughout the bylaw. So we've got both of these are under R2. We just want to make sure that the rear yard is consistent with the 6 meters where garage vehicular access is from a lane.
Okay, carry on again, please.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to commercial and industrial. This one is sort of aligned with one of the guiding principles of having a bylaw that's sort of logically organized and intuitive. And what we noticed is under the central business district, under the development regulations, we've included dwelling unit area, and that's specific to live work. So again, realizing that we want this to be intuitive, we're suggesting to move this and put it with the live work regulations. And that way, if you want to understand the regulations that are associated with live work, it's all in one spot.
Okay, I believe we'll be discussing this part of the same matter, so carry on.
Okay. This is another change in lot area. So we recognized that in the C2, C3, and business industrial minor, we wanted to make sure that these lot regulations are accommodating the actual operations or businesses that we expect in these districts. So the recommendation, so there's a couple here, We're suggesting a change in the service commercial to allow a max of 1.5 hectares. That's about 3.7 acres. Then for the highway commercial, C3, we want to add the word minimum to the lot area. And that would be a minimum of 1,200 meters squared, which is about 0.3 acres. And then third, in the business industrial minor, to change the wording again from maximum to actually minimum. So that would mean that there'd be a minimum lot area requirement of 2,000 meters squared, which is about 0.5 acres. Any questions for those three?
Any question for any of these three for council? No, carry on, please.
Okay, I think I'm going to pass it off to Laura now.
Thanks, Becky. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So this next round of comments is a list of changes proposed based on input from key stakeholders, and that includes members of the public and Yellowhead County. And the next following 6 comments will be referencing commercial and industrial. And similar to Becky running through it, I'll pause after each for any comments. So this first comment, we received feedback from Yellowhead County regarding a town property adjacent to the county boundary that was zoned as BI2, so business industrial heavy. And due to the nature of the BI2 district, this could potentially have impacts on those adjacent properties in the county. So administration has determined this was likely a data entry error, and we are recommending a change to the subject lands from heavy industrial to BI1 industrial light to ensure complementary land uses and reduced risk of impacts to adjacent properties. Any questions?
Actually, the one question for the viewing, could you explain B1, what it's changed to for anyone out there that doesn't know what it means?
Yeah, I can. Just one second here, I'll pull up. Actually, Becky, if you know it off by hand, otherwise I will pull up the bylaw as well.
Yeah, so that's business industrial minor. And I could explain the purpose of that. It's to provide for development of compatible commercial and industrial uses which do not adversely affect surrounding non-industrial uses through the generation of emissions, noise, odors, vibrations, or dust.
And helpful distinction as well is those any impacts would be contained within the building versus heavy industrial could be exterior from the building and could have impacts offsite.
Do we have any questions from councillors on this? Nope, we'll move on to the next, please.
So this next comment, a community member provided feedback regarding the purpose statement, again for BI2. And the draft land use currently states that impacts may extend beyond the boundaries of the site, as I had just mentioned on that last comment. It's quite common for major industrial districts to have these offsite impacts. So administration is recommending revising the statement slightly just to ensure the purpose of business industrial major is incorporated. So the purpose statement has been revised or is being recommended to be revised to state that larger scale industrial land uses may have adverse impacts beyond the boundaries of the site. And this does not, just a comment, this does not negate the need for mitigation. So this adjustment to the purpose statement is just attempting to encompass the true nature of what BI2 or major industrial major may include.
Any questions from council? Carry on, please, the next one.
Okay, so this one, there was a concern with the change from M2 in the current land use bylaw to BI2 in the draft bylaw, and a worry that it may limit residents and their uses. So the purpose of changing M2 to BI2 is really just a consolidation of districts, going back to the guiding principles and ensuring that any uses that are similar in nature are simplified and are more concise in this updated bylaw. So leaving the districts more general can really just allow for that additional flexibility. And the main distinction, again, that we had recently stated between minor and major relates to whether operations are contained or not contained within the building. So no recommendation is being made in reference to this comment.
If I may add, just before there's any questions, just one clarifying piece, because I want to make sure everyone understands. We're talking about, in these last two slides, we're talking about uses and districts. So the last slide was talking about the districts themselves. And just to clarify, there is major industrial, the use as a discretionary use listed under the industry minor. So that's when we're talking about districts. In this scenario, we're talking about the actual uses. So what we've done is just generally categorized minor versus major operations, since it's pretty hard to sort of be able to list every single type of industrial operation. So in this case, we're basically just clarifying that the difference between the two of those comes down to what we're seeing on the screen here, minor being operations contained within the building and major being contained or outside of the building. So that's specific to the uses. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Becky.
Anyone from council have a question on this? Nope, you can carry on.
Okay, so this next one was a concern shared over section 11.13.5C within the BI2 land use district, which stated a maximum lot area of 4,000 meters squared. So we recognize that this isn't a sufficient size for most industrial lots in this district, and are recommending removing the minimum lot width and depth and including only a minimum lot area of 1 hectare or 2.47 acres.
I think we're good. That was clear.
Okay, so this one, there was some feedback from community regarding security suites with an overall concern on the new size restrictions and just a desire to see business and residential uses mixed. So just want to point out that security suites will be addressed in greater detail later in this presentation. So this comment is specifically referencing just the live-work units. So the live-work units are currently listed as discretionary in the central business district. And the main purpose of this is being to support a variety of mixed-use residential and commercial developments. So live-work can't be used interchangeably with security suites, as its purpose does not consider the mix of industrial or business and residential, sorry. So a typical live-work would kind of look like that standard retail on the ground floor and a dwelling unit above. So administration is recommending making no change to the live-work units.
Okay, since it's coming up later in presentation, carry on.
Okay, sounds good. So this comment was around driveways in business industrial, and the feedback from stakeholders highlighted a desire to allow driveways to match the existing surfacing. For instance, an existing gravel road shouldn't require a paved access. So the reason for this provision is specifically to ensure that less on-site soil materials are being tracked onto public roadways. But that being said, administration recommends changing the clause 9.13 to provide a relaxation to this provision to match the surface of the public road the lot is being accessed from at the discretion of the development authority. So this just allows more flexibility while still achieving the purpose of the provision.
The only comment I have on that is like where you put it's discretionary, because I totally agree. If you're also the amount of pavement you have to put in your properties. That's the only question I have or comment. Unless anyone else. Councillor Persicny.
Yeah, through to our presenters. So on this one with the or is it I guess I'm struggling with this one a little bit because I want to make sure that this isn't just left to somebody saying that you have to. I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to look for here. I want to make sure that the people who are on a gravel road don't have to pave. And it's not just left to the discretion of an employee saying, no, you have to pave even though it's gravel. I want to make sure that it's very clear in the bylaw that states, if you front onto gravel, you don't have to pave. And if you front onto pavement, then your driveway will have to be paved. Like, I want to make sure that it's clear and not, at the discretion of somebody who may or may not like you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, through the chair to answer your question. So the discretion will be given to the development authority, so essentially the town. So what this does is allows the town to assess these on a case by case so that there's additional flexibility. Again, to sort of understand is this requirement going to be, a financial burden? Does it make sense? The recommendation to change this to that just allows for that discretion. But this is sort of a standard requirement, again, to avoid the tracking of materials onto public roadways. So it is an important regulation. However, to your point, through this clause, I think it allows the ability to assess them based on the merits of the proposal.
Go ahead, Councilor Edson.
Yeah, so further to it, I guess my concern is all of us in the room right now understand that that's what it's for. But if I was to fast forward 5, 8, 10 years, we have different staff at the table and we have a real, somehow way or another, we hire, hard-nosed development person and they don't read through the lines. They go, no, it's hard surfacing. It says hard surfacing. Nowhere in here right now do I see where it says, if you're on the gravel, you can have these. It says you shall maintain hard surfacing. Consideration to relax this to match the surface of the public road is being accessed. So again, it comes down to the personnel, does it not? Like what's their option if the authority person decides that they're going to hard surface even though they're coming off a gravel road? Like, I just want to make sure that.
So I'll through you, Deputy Mayor. So I think what we're hearing, and if council agrees with this, is that you're looking for a bit more certainty with this regulation. So basically, point blank, the development on site must maintain a minimum of the same surface it's coming from. Doesn't mean that the developer can't add more. If they want to put asphalt down, they can. But if it's gravel, they're coming gravel up, and it's gravel what the site matches. So it sounds like you want to be more definitive and less discretion.
I personally, through the chair, I personally would prefer that. I always struggle with the human side of it. Our staff aren't robots, and sure, today we have great staff, but we've had staff in this community before where they read it their own way and determine it their own way, and then people are mad. And I'd rather say, I'd like it to be clear, not clear as mud.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with Councilor position. I think it's important to have consistency. When you have it open-ended as discretionary, one person being told one time, fast forward to another staff person may be told something else. So I think some clarity around that is key. For sure, if you are on a paved surface, you need to have pavement access in that paved surface. We have worked hard to try to have that in our community. We know we have a lot of dirt and dust based on our resource industry here, which is okay. But whatever we can do to minimize that, but to expect people to spend a whole bunch of money to hard surface off a gravel road, I don't think is wise. And I think that having some clarity within the definition of that will ensure consistency throughout the application for any future developments, either tomorrow or 10 years from now.
That pretty much consensus, Councilman? Okay. Okay, no, we'll do that for sure. Or direct.
Okay, if we're done with this one, move on, please.
So the next 4 comments are addressing residential districts now. So this first comment shared concern regarding the definition of a duplex dwelling, as it is defined as a stacked building on one lot. And or sorry, falls under one title because it's based on one lot. So the basis of the concern was the cost of 2 units under one title could create barriers for individuals to afford the purchase price or mortgage of this dwelling. So administration believes that duplex dwellings in the R1 low density residential are a form of housing that should be included in this draft land use bylaw, as some exist today in the area, and it also provides the opportunity for them to be built in the future. So there is a semi-detached unit as well, which is defined separately and would allow for a single unit across 2 parcels as shown on this graphic here. So the recommend. Sorry.
President. So just if I could, Deputy Mayor, so sometimes there's confusion with what a duplex is versus semi-detached. They are actually different things. I think historically they've been mixed together as one, and we're just trying to display that they are 2 different things. And I think they both have there's a need and a use in our community. And I'm not one to say whether it's affordable for somebody to build it or not. I think we want to provide the options so that it's not just singular. So I think we're happy with leaving it the way it is.
Okay, so just to clarify, on one side where it says 1 unit, I think that's what the individual was looking for. And I do appreciate where your clarification stacked on is different. So if you're gonna have 2 separate titles, I believe that was the question and we addressed it correctly. Does anyone else have any question or concern?
No, I just, if I made it to the chair, I would have never known that, what's a semi-detached, I would have called that a duplex.
Semi-detached.
In my brain, that's been a duplex forever.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, is there's confusion with that. So they are different.
So just to clarify though, because I'm exactly right, I would think duplex is like that. So is there clarification? What's the difference between a duplex and a semi-detached? Like they are looking.
So that's the clarification, and that's the way that the definitions are described within this draft bylaws. So the reason this is so that in the duplex scenario, you have one landowner. So I live on the bottom and I rent out the top, but it's one landowner, or you can rent out both units, but it's one title, one landowner. In the semi-detached, it's one building divided by a separated firewall and 2 separate titles, so you can have 2 separate owners.
So a lot of it would be in the wording, what we would think as a duplex, which is on one side, is actually a semi-detached, the other one, so we're just clarifying the wording. Any more, Councilor Taylor?
Yeah, through the chair, and I think to Deputy Mayor Chenard, this is kind of calling those things a duplex has been an Alberta-ism. If you look out in central Canada, Ontario, this is the definitions they've used.
Right.
To Councilor Position's point, I agree. I would have called the one on the left duplex forever and ever. Just recently, I lost an argument with my wife on this. So and now officially, I've
Now
lost
you've learned it.
that argument.
She's not watching tonight, though, right?
I hope not.
Is there any more questions from Jonathan?
Well, I just wanted to clarify that a duplex can be split side to side and up and down.
That's all.
It's just on one title. That's the difference. Like a duplex isn't defined by stacked. It's defined by two units in one building on one parcel.
Okay, so I believe that would answer the question the individual asked, so they would have to apply for a semi-detached rather than duplex, it would be wording.
So the semi-detached is when you split the title. So you can take a duplex and
Yeah.
subdivide and create a semi-detached. It happens, and it's happened in our community.
So if we clarify the wording, that was the concern, and I
Yeah.
think we've answered that. Any other questions from council? Then please move on.
Okay, so this next one, there was a comment regarding the side yard setback within R1 stating that minimum side setback for one side is 3 meters with or without a lane. This had already been corrected in the version completed for public hearing. So no change is needed here, or no recommendation, sorry, is needed here.
I believe we have no questions, carry on.
Okay, so this feedback noted that there was discrepancies within the regulation for R1 low density residential for the side yard setback. The regulation only addressed side yard setback in laneless development. Administration recommends removing in the case of laneless development, so that the regulation addresses both laneless and laned parcels.
No questions, carry on.
Okay, so for this one, firstly, I just want to recognize that this recommendation is logged under the stakeholder feedback. However, this is something administration was considering in addition to the comment, to a comment received. So we placed it here for the purpose of the presentation, but just wanted to quickly note that. So the consideration is referencing a desire to designate R2 general residential along the highway corridor on the on 4th Avenue instead of R1. So administration's recommendation is to change the zoning of these properties from R1 to R2, just to allow greater flexibility in housing type in line with the land use, the draft land use bylaws guiding principles. It's important to note that while the zoning change would allow for a greater range of those housing options in the area, it would still allow our typical single detached home. Yep.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm in support of this change. One of the comments that was made to me is that, you know, maybe it would not be desirable to have a single family house being built along the highway. Most people won't build their dream homes along the highway, but could be a good opportunity for multifamily or things of that nature. So I think this is a good change and allows some flexibility along the highway corridor.
Any other? My only comment, we're gonna talk about Glenmore, because when I think 4th Avenue, it's from one end to the other, so we are clarifying some of the areas, so we may have comments later about Glenmore. So
Yeah.
other than that, I have no questions, carry on, please.
Okay, I believe this is me now. Back to me. So these are what we're calling general. So they don't necessarily fall under one of the categories that we've had before as it relates to residential, industrial. First one, there was a comment made by Yellowhead County that digital billboards or freestanding signage doesn't seem to be addressed in the draft land use bylaw. So that's just, again, being able to have regulations that help to mitigate against any visual impacts of having digital display signs. So administration reviewed land use bylaw regulations from comparable municipalities just to assess different ways to regulate digital signage. The recommendation today is to add digital displays under the general sign provisions rather than creating an entirely new sign type. This will allow different sign types to apply a digital display. So you can imagine either a fascia sign on the front of a store, a freestanding sign. So that's sort of the way that we're proposing to define it. And I'll show you that in the next slide. And then include regulations that would help mitigate any of those offsite impacts. So I won't read all of these, but again, these regulations are meant to help mitigate against any of the impacts from the light, as well as any flashing animations. And it goes further to stipulate what types of signs that you could see digital displays on. Any questions for this one?
Yes, Councillor Taylor.
Through the chair to council administration, just looking at under the recommendations under I, it says digital displays adjacent to residential districts shall be limited to hours of operation for the business and should be downcast light in a manner do not have offsite impacts. Hours of operation for some businesses can be really quite late. That could be, for some, it could be midnight or even 2 a.m. for some businesses. So if we were to, throwing this out there, to put a maximum time of 9 p.m., 10 p.m., certainly adjacent to residential districts, you know, you get, there were some liquor stores or some bars or restaurants that can be open really quite late. I would wonder about having a digital sign near a residential area, certainly. So.
Go ahead.
Chair, maybe I'll take a stab at this one first, and then I'll let Becky or Laura Julie weigh in as well. So I think a good point, and I think that's one of the challenges, I think, in Edson, being the highway goes through right through the middle of town, and there is residential right adjacent, you know, right off the highway. So certainly that's a concern. One thing to make note of, though, is that this provision, what this provision does allow in the case of a development authority issuing a permit for one of these signs, you could list different hours of operation for the sign compared to the business. It doesn't have to be the same, right? So you could say the business can be open till midnight, but the sign, they have to turn it off at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. So you could do that.
Yeah.
Another way to do this, it would be to include a setback requirement saying you couldn't have a digital display sign within X number of meters of residential land use. So even if anywhere there's going to be applied, you do that offset, and it was within that distance, you couldn't have it there. So that's another way to do it.
Go ahead, Councilor
Yeah, to the
Taylor.
chair, I was, when I was speaking, I was certainly looking at your first option.
Yeah.
Is that the hours of the sign will be different than the hours of the business, right? Business can be open until 2 AM. I don't think anyone would appreciate a digital sign going through the living room window, you know, at midnight, so.
But certainly this would allow us to, in the condition of a development permit, which is what is enforceable, to say these are the hours of operation for that sign. And then if complaints come in, you can enforce it based on that condition.
So I'm understanding the option would be there because a lot of times you may want the digital sign to match your business hours. You could be a liquor store thing, I'm selling wine, you know, on a thing. So, but then with our 2 one-ways, I doubt you're gonna turn the sign towards the residential area. You're gonna want it facing to the highway so the public can see it. So I get where it's there, but you're gonna have the sign facing towards traffic more in the residential area, as long as there's discretion for the sign.
So I think, and this might be a good opportunity, but Mr. Deputy Mayor, I don't think we're road enforcement of the land use bylaw. The regulations are put in case you need them. It doesn't mean that we're out proactively enforcing all this stuff, but if a complaint does come in, then we have the tools and mechanisms to deal with that. I think that's the important thing. We're not out daily looking for things to enforce. It's just not, we don't have the staff to do that. That's not the intent. That's not the way council wants us to operate. But if you don't have regulations and guidance within the bylaw, when it comes time, when you do have concerns from your residents or public, you need mechanisms to be able to enforce. So that's essentially what this is providing. It's the opportunity to put provisions and deal with that should it become a problem. You're right. If it's facing the highway and no one's complaining about it, I'm not gonna deal with that.
Go ahead, Councilor Persistny.
Yeah, through the chair to rest of the council. It's not, we throw it on business, but 7-Eleven could have a sign, only 24 hours a day. So,
Yeah.
I think the biggest sign is sometimes not the illuminated sign, it's the flashing of the signs,
Yeah, that's it.
right?
Yeah.
You know, when you're driving down like the illuminated signs they're waving the future because people want to have advertisements. It's easy to change. They light up. I think that the part that I like in here is the part where it is adjusted, how bright it is depends on how bright it is outside. As long as there's ways in there so that, you know, like a good neighbor clause where you know, it does talk about animated and duration of 6 seconds, which isn't bad. So
Councilor Taylor.
No, I'm through the chair. I'm satisfied with that response. As long as there's, again, Bishop puts a good neighbor clause or discretion from staff to adjust the hours of the sign if necessary, and certainly mentioned in yours brightness. So that's fine. So thank you for your comments.
Councilor Bevan.
want us to turn it, that's great.
Well, I was gonna give him to turn it, but go ahead, Councilor Bevan.
Through the chair, I remember one time when we signs on the hotels or motels or whatever were bright and flashing and that. Back when we had a meter ourselves, we would be able to go out and test brightness of the signs, whether it was in a cloudy day or a bright day and that. And I remember going back a few years when I first got on council, we had complaints about people driving in the town. The light was so bright from those things coming up and on that they complained about it. And we did buy a piece of equipment. We could go out there and look at it and make them adjust it to what it should be. Do we still have that, or are we just gonna rely on what it says here on the light?
Chief Deputy Mayor, that actually brings up a really good point. I'm not sure if we saw that piece of equipment. We'll have to look into that if we do have it. But it brings up a good point. If you're gonna have a condition or a regulation on brightness, you should define what that bloom is.
Yeah.
And that way we can measure it, and if it's above, then it's easy to enforce. So that's really actually a good pickup that we might have to investigate a little further. We might consider maybe putting in a threshold. That way, again, it's a mark in the sand that we can use, right? Because right now, if it just says it needs to be adjusted to what, right? So.
You gotta follow.
Yeah, follow up on that was. There was a part in there that said it could only be so many luminates.
So whether,
I can't remember what it was, but that was when I first got on council here, and that was quite a while ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
all right, we'll look into that. That's a good point.
Councillor Kevin.
Yeah, to the chair, nice pickup, Councillor Bevan, and that actually helps to my point too, in terms of what the brightness may be and Councillor Petition's point about the flashing. That's perhaps, I think, you know, when you think about it, is some in someone's bedroom window is what you're trying to avoid, right? But yeah, so those are my things.
Councillor Bevan.
Through the mayor, chair. So does that mean when it's flashing and that? I know we have a business in town right now that has the flashing lights going the same as what the RCMP lights are and that. A lot of people get concerned about that. They're slamming on the brakes. And I remember there was one business down on Main Street on 4th Avenue. They did put a light on top of their billboard. And I know bylaw went and said, no, you cannot do it. It's not the rules and regulations. You cannot put a light up there. It cannot be flashing. But now we have one down there that it goes steady. And I've seen just what about having accidents there because they almost look like the RCMP people got people stopped on the side of the road and that, and they don't. And it is bright too.
A couple things, Deputy Mayor, so, we also might want to check in with Alberta Transportation, because maybe they have some rules on the highway too that we'll have to make, and those will trump ours as well. And then secondly, I don't know if Becky or Laura, if you have something you want to share, supplement or.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Just something to add. There is an additional statement above digital displays. It would be 10.64, titled sign illumination, and it reads, flashing, animated, or internally illuminated signs shall not be allowed in any land use district where they might adversely affect residents in adjacent housing or residential land use districts, or interfere with or obstruct a motor vehicles, vehicle driver's vision or interpretation of oncoming traffic signs or traffic signal lights.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any more questions on this? Please move on.
Okay, so the next one that we will chat through is screening. So there were concerns expressed that individuals that have existing businesses through this specific provision would have to introduce screening in the form of fencing if they wanted to expand anything on their business. So just to clarify, this specific regulation that we're talking about, the word screened is causing a bit of confusion. So we're suggesting a change because in reality, the intent of this provision is really to help increase the aesthetic of the site. So what we mean by that is through the addition of landscaping. And we have a specific section that speaks to landscaping requirements. This is aligned with the council's strategic goals to beautify the town. And the suggestion is to change the clause to say all frontages facing a street shall include landscaping in accordance to section 8.2.
Anyone, council, have a question? Go ahead, Councilor Moore.
Through the chair to whoever could answer this. I remember a few years ago that I think the town had a contest or something for beautification of businesses, and I don't know what year that was, but I just, I seem to remember that from past.
Yeah, sorry, Chair.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure when that was, maybe someone else. But I think again, what this was is the word screen. If you look at the definition of screening in the proposed land use bylaw, that's about blocking from view. That's certainly not the intent here. So it was a good pickup by the public feedback. That's not the intent. It's for providing some curb, street facing landscaping to again, for aesthetics and for appeal. So good pickup, and we'll make sure that screens are removed from that clause.
Go ahead, Councillor Pacini.
Yeah, through to administration. We, and I don't know, I'm looking at it right now in here, but in some cases in the community, we've been so strict on our landscaping that it's almost to the detriment of the business owner. You know, oh, you gotta put bushes and trees, and they're like blocking the product they're trying to sell. Now, how do we address that? Like, you know, like there's places in town that we've had to put bushes and trees in front of, you know, like a car lot where you're trying to sell cars. Yeah.
So if I could,
Like,
Deputy
you
Mayor,
know, I do know it says in here exists like trees and shrubs are in here, right?
I don't have it in the log. I did have it in another piece of, when we were working through this. I did a calculation based on the current proposed regs. And I can recall, the Walmart parking lots, let's say the Walmart site, that would require about 68 trees or something like that, equivalent to trees or shrubs. So that's a pretty big parking lot. You probably wouldn't even barely notice that. And then where's the Tel store on 4th, where the water store is, and the old Telus, that site would need 2 trees based on these regs. So 2 trees wouldn't, I don't think, screen or block the materials or products to the property. So that's just some context. Like, these regs aren't as onerous, I think, as like we did attend. Yeah, we weren't looking to make it onerous, but we were including provisions to make sure that there was some landscaping. Landscaping, greenery is good for our community. So we believe they're okay. They're not certainly not at the far end of landscape requirements. So I think that's just some context to help understand how they would calculate today as some existing sites. That helps.
Just comment, I like where you took out the screening, but I agree on the landscaping, there is discretion because some of the properties are on 4th Avenue, the trees make 0 sense, like the property's set up. So when you get to the far end where you have a gravelled parking lot and a chain link fence, where you're saying landscape, there has to be an option to add landscaping, maybe to the outside of the property, rather inside. And some of the properties we come back on 4th Avenue are all cement, so they'd have to physically chisel through their cement, try and plant a tree. On the same token, some of them provided, what if we put in a temporary planter during the summer and the winter time? So if there's option for it and it's not specifying trees, landscape, then without opening right up, then we're on the right path. Councilor Bennett.
Through the chair. So are you saying on trees, are you saying wood trees? The reason I asked that is because I know a business in town that was told they had to put up trees, and they did fight it back a while. It went down to Costco, got 4 nice green trees, would never ever grow, they're plastic. They put them in the ground, and that was while I was happy. They would never grow, no roots, nothing at all, wouldn't bother the sidewalks, wouldn't bother their foundation in the buildings, anything at all. I just wonder, because if that happened, then they were approved, so.
So you're getting where I don't think we've contemplated that in the proposed bylaw. I guess I'd turn to council as that's you know, accommodation the council would like to see, whether they can be real or artificial. I'm not sure if I've heard any examples of that. I don't know if our consultants have.
I can show you where after, so sure.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
So I think with this one, you know, it comes down to a little bit of common sense. You know, I'm very frustrated with our highway corridor. It's ugly. In many cases, and if we want to invoke change and we want to see things to improve as development goes on along the highway corridor, we do need to have some provisions for some sort of landscaping. The challenge I see is that we want people to landscape, but then it's not maintained afterwards and you have nothing but weeds. So there has to be an enforcement mechanism in that. You know, depending on the size of the property and depending on what the use of that business is, it may make sense to have some trees. It may just make some more sense just to have some nice grass that's nicely landscaped. There's communities where residential neighborhoods that have nothing but artificial turf here in northern Alberta. So to me, I don't care if they're live trees or fake trees. Actually, probably the fake trees will look nicer. And we won't have to worry about pine beetle and all that other stuff.
These will look funny in the winter. but-
Yeah, I know, but, you know, so I struggle with this one a little bit because, we often talk about needing to improve the highway corridor with beautification. If we're not gonna have any rules in place to do it, then we're gonna end up with the same thing over and over again. But we do risk going too far the other way as well. So I think, what I'm seeing here is a good, mix. And I think some of the changes here address some of the concerns that were raised in terms of screening and that sort of thing. So that's where I'm at.
Any other comments? Counselor Jessica?
Thanks. You said right.
Perfect.
Through the deputy mayor Chenard to council and administration. Thanks for bringing this back. I think that I can see what Councillor Pacitti mentioned about, you know, if you plant a tree and it blocks your view and your whole business. But I do like that there's a provision that it's one tree is equivalent to 3 shrubs, which are low and tidy and can be little maintenance, you know, on a regular basis, right? And still add some greenery and beautification to the highway corridor. So I like the changes that you made.
Okay, any other questions on this? Carry on to next one, please.
Okay, so this is similar in nature, but for this one, we're speaking to the screening of outdoor storage. So there was concern around this regulation that it would negatively impact businesses as they wouldn't be able to display their goods, that would block the view. So we wanted to clarify that in this scenario, it's specific to outdoor storage. So what we mean by that is storage of materials, you might have equipment. So this is there to screen those and is not intended to impede the view of goods that might be on display or for sale on a lot. So at this time, there's no recommended change.
I have a comment on that. So we have to define without naming business names, but some of the companies driving by what we would consider storage, maybe equipment that could be for rent or sale. So we're saying you're storing it here, but you're screening it from the public. So I'd like somewhere in there to have it discretionary, because even maybe my idea of someone's got a cat stored in their yard and we're blocking it, but on the same token, the piece of equipment looks nice, someone drive by, oh, look, I can hire a cat. So I get it, we have to have, because some of the places that have screenings, we're getting back to the mayor's comment, they put all the screening in, it's not maintained and it looks worse now because it's mixed mangled screening. So I like what we're seeing, but some of it has to be open to discretionary, depending on what we're calling storing of what. Go ahead, comes. Oh, sorry. CPO, CAO beverage.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Chenard. I think what we're trying to do is strike that balance between beautification, as council has been very vocal with regards to beautification in this community. And we are challenged by this because of what we have existing. So I think that these provisions, as mentioned, and just to wrap these 2 items together, essentially, you know, you have to have regulations in order to move forward, in order to be able to, you know, progress with some of these decisions for these things that the council has set forward in the strategic plan. So I think what we've tried to do is to strike that careful balance and not to go too far, because I can tell you these provisions are not too far, you know, compared to other communities. So just wanted to add to that conversation.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions on this? Move on, please.
Okay, so there was a request or a comment from the feedback that we received to include confined feeding operations to define it. This is not currently a land use that's being recommended in town, and they're actually not regulated by the municipality. So by defining it in the land use bylaw, it might be misleading since it's not currently a listed use. So the recommendation is not to include a definition for them in the draft bylaw.
Okay, I don't believe there's any questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, back to landscaping. So the concern here was around this requirement under the Highway 16 corridor overlay under development permit requirements. So it stipulates that all applications for development permits should be accompanied by a landscaping plan that's completed by either a landscape architect or a person qualified to perform that work. The reason being is that typically someone that we would consider a qualified professional, they can suggest vegetation that's best suited to the town soil conditions. And again, depending on where that site is, suggest or landscaping that might be able to better adapt to potential harsher conditions so that they can be maintained over time. So at this moment, the recommendation is that there are no changes made to this requirement.
If I could, or just to be clear, this provision exists in the current bylaw, so we haven't changed it from what's in the current, so. But if the council wishes to change that, it's fine, whatever recommending it stays.
Well, the only thing I have a question with, if I understand, you have to hire a professional to tell me I need to put my 2 trees. That may cost more than the trees. It's like, I can read what it says, but just make a stipulation, I get it. We're gonna recommend. All you have to do is go to your neighbor and say, hey, what kind of tree grows here? So that's where I'm reading that you need a landscape. What's that gonna cost? And who's qualified to do it? Maybe something, I get it, we don't want someone bigger to stream saying, hey, I like palm trees. That's never gonna happen, but we don't need someone qualified to say, we're living in Edson, I want to put in a pine tree in the street, we know that. Go ahead, Councilor Position.
Yeah, through the chair to administration, what would define a person qualified to perform such work? It's pretty vague, right? Does that mean that I can, hire Councilor Bevan because he has an acreage? Is he qualified? It's like because it doesn't, it's like either you're hiring an architect or you're not. And I'm not sure what a person qualified to perform such work is.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, so I think this is wording that was in the current law nice law, so I don't know if I can speak fully to what the intent of that was, but I guess what if I could take a stab at it, maybe, let's say there was a professional landscaping company in town that was their work, they did landscaping as a profession, so you might consider that to be a person qualified, but certainly, I agree, it's a little bit vague, so if council wishes this provision to stay in the overlay only, remember this is just in the overlay, this isn't blanketed across the community. Then we could probably make that wording changes to say a landscape architect, or we could say an LAT, landscape architect technologist, maybe be a qualified, we could do that. Folks from Urban, anything to share or add with that from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's similar to a lot of what has been discussed today. It's challenging when we've got a regulation that is intended to cover all scales of development, because you can imagine for something like a Walmart, you might want a landscape plan that's done by a landscape architect or a professional. In this scenario, it could be an arborist. I think in some situations, you might have regulations or reference to different like plant types that you may allow or may not as a compromise. Again, it might be, hey, as long as you're following the requirements that the town is looking for when it comes to landscaping, again, based on the fact that the town is hoping to have vegetation that actually lasts and stays alive. So that's a potential. Again, I think that's something that we'd have to look into as to how comparable municipalities or how modern land use bylaws are addressing that. But yeah, I would completely agree. It's tough to necessarily definitively define what a qualified professional would be.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you. So my concern is trying to find a landscape architect in our community could be difficult for smaller, businesses and that sort of thing, but we do have arborists, we do have contractors that do extensive landscaping within the community. So is there a way to encompass that within the definition? To ensure that we are getting quality while still trying to do so in an affordable way for those that may want to develop.
I think it's it's kind of related to what's already been said. It's a pretty tough thing. So it might be one of the suggestions that Becky made might be a really good one, is to maybe what the option is to come up with that list, maybe we look at a professional to say, do an analysis of what our conditions are here and give us a list of, 5 or 10 species of shrubs and trees that are best to go here. And then basically we regulate that you must plant from this list. So that might be a way to work around that. We wouldn't have that right today. We might be able to get that in a short period of time, we might not, so.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Go ahead.
The other option is to change the verbiage to qualified professional, because that's how we changed it in other parts of the bylaw, so that we weren't talking about you have to call an engineer and you have to call this person, you have to call that person. We just said qualified professional, and it's defined in the bylaw already.
Deputy Mayor,
Yeah,
actually, this
go
is
ahead.
potentially through to Julia, just because this is not a new provision, has this been an issue with regards to past developments? We've had, this bylaw has been in place for many years, so just curious as far as have we been challenged by this particular clause?
Through the chair to council and administration, I really like Starling's suggestion. A qualified professional means a person with experience and training in a pertinent discipline and who is a qualified expert with expertise appropriate for the relevant critical area or subject. So I really like that.
It's in the bylaw.
Yeah, so I like that change, because that then encompasses what the suggestions have already been made.
Councilor Taylor.
Yeah, through the chair, I also like Julia's suggestion, and are you saying take out landscape architect and straight the way down? Okay, good. I think that adds then. So, and encompasses the many things that Mayor Zahara had mentioned, arborist or just landscaper, and there's lots of opportunities for people to provide those suggestions in our community and for relatively low cost as well, or if any.
Thanks, Councilor Position.
Yeah, through the chair, I guess if it's the exact verbiage we've had before, and we've had no problems with it, I don't know why we just need to change it. Because you just get added another, the word professional is, it's defined, but now you need somebody with a professional designation. So right now we have qualified person, and obviously it's working, so why change it?
Okay, perfect. We'll move on. Next one. Thank you. It's not broken, I'll fix it.
Okay, this next one is in relation to enforcement fees. So there's a section in the bylaw that speaks to enforcement in the proposed bylaw. The concern is just regarding the high fees that are listed. So under the guiding principles, part of what was important as part of this rewrite was to create regulations that are enforceable and that follow best practice. The MGA provides options for dealing with non-compliance, and I think one thing that we wanted to clarify is that these options, or the enforcement fines specifically, are a bit of a last resort. There are many different avenues to work with landowners or anyone that has been deemed non-compliant before you have to resort to that tactic for charging the actual fees. Again, this section was written based on best practice and in alignment with the requirements under the Municipal Government Act. So at this time, there is no change recommended to the enforcement fees section.
See if I could supplement that, couple things, we, obviously, the one thing that we did do is, this bylaw was reviewed by our lawyers for a legal review, and they didn't recommend changing this. I think I've done 29 years of municipal government land use planning and development. I think every bylaw has a fee structure and fine structure in it. Never have ever have we, any municipality I've worked in, employed it. I've got legal advice from lawyers on this many times in the past. They're always recommending it stays in. Again, it's a last resort. There may be a situation at some point in the future where this mechanism is the best one to use to get compliance. But I've never seen it. So the recommendation is to leave it in. But as I mentioned before, our first step is always to get compliance through communication and chatting with people. And typically you go to a court injunction before you'd ever go to fines. So we're recommending this.
Any concerns from council? Okay, thank you. Move on, please.
Okay, next is shipping containers. So there was a concern that if you wanted to put a shipping container on your property, that this would trigger offsite levies. We looked into that. A shipping container would be classified as ancillary improvement, which are exempt from the offsite levies as per the offsite levy policy. So at this point, there is no recommended change as it does not trigger offsite levies.
In this bylaw, we don't have the reading, so I get that clarification and without springing it up, but that also, there's no restrictions on numbers. We changed that as well, depending on the size of property. Am I correct? Things we have shipping containers up.
So you get your SRT, no, there are shipping container regulations within the proposed bylaw. This is just pertaining to this one comment that says it triggers an offsite levy, it doesn't. But there are regulations within the bylaw that dictate, or sorry, regulate how many containers you can have on any type of land use.
Okay, that's clarification. I just wanted to. Any other questions on it? Move on, please.
Okay, so we're going to move on to those items that were further described in the briefing note. So this is a summary of concerns raised from stakeholders with amendment options for council to consider. The first one is side yard setback minimums. So there was feedback to incorporate a reduced side setback. Currently, the draft land use bylaw has not proposed a change in the side setback. So currently the bylaw is 2.4 meters, and that's just been carried over as part of this draft. When we look at other comparable municipalities, it's actually quite common to see the 1.5 meters, again, just increasing that flexibility and allowing for more developable area. And in some cases, we are seeing minimums as low as 1.2. The concern with the 2.4, that's around 8 feet of space required between the home and the side property line. So it does limit the amount of developable area on a parcel. And therefore it would limit the building footprints that you have depending on the lot width or the size of the lot. So administration believes it's a reasonable change to decrease the side setback to 1.5 meters. That's about 5 feet in the R1 and R2 land use districts. Another piece that we want to note is that the development authority can vary up to 15% of side setbacks. That's currently in the proposed land use bylaw. And that would mean that if we had the 1.5 meter side setback, they could vary 15% of that, which roughly gets you to about 1.28 meters or 1.3 meters. So that with that variance authority, you could approve something as low as 1.2 or 1.3 meters. But of course, that would be at the discretion of the development authority. So there's still some options and flexibility when it comes to side setbacks. But the recommendation is to reduce it to the 1.5.
Any questions? Oh, go ahead, Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, through the chair, to administration, I'm happy to see this change back based on the comments that we received at the public hearing. When we look at, and again, if that's not something covered in the land use bylaw, I get that. When the gentleman who brought this forward in the public hearing talked about fireproofing materials and fireproofing sidings and things like that. Is that something that can be regulated within the land use bylaw, or is that something beyond us? Because the original thought about the 8 feet was that it just creates a bigger spread, 16 feet essentially from house to house. And of course, recently we saw, even local fires here in town. And I'm not saying an additional 6 feet would have saved anything, but we're looking at fireproofing materials. Is that something that could be potentially covered within this, or is that another piece, or not even regulated within us?
Yeah, that's the Alberta Building Code that regulates that. So basically, as soon as that side yard setback starts to shrink, codes go up and fireproofing has to increase. So it's all regulated by the building code. So that's where I would come into play.
And again, I'm just supportive of this change again. And it was brought forward by the gentleman. If you did see a house, you know, it needs to be replaced or burned to the ground in some way, need to be replaced. If you increase the setbacks to what would have been 8 feet setback, you're looking at a smaller home. And I would hate to see that. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Just for council's comfort, we did after the public hearing, just did a little bit of scanning around the community of some other houses and approvals, and there are examples of homes being built in Hudson. At that time, the development authority must have buried the side yards because there are some 1.5s out there. In fact, I've easily found a handful, so it's not uncommon even in town today. So, as mentioned, we don't see a problem with changing this.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. With, I've got years of experience with the 10-minute fire response and the Alberta safety codes. And I have struggled in smaller communities that don't have 10-minute response times with the 1.5 meter side yard setback. Many municipalities have this, and you then run into difficulties with your safety codes officer. So what we did here when we came together was correct. There are options available. However, once you move from 2.4 meters to 1.5, and I respectfully disagree with our consultants, you cannot vary without 10-minute response time below 1.5. You will not ever get that approved by a building official, respectfully. If you have 10-minute response time, that's a different thing. That's Edmonton, perhaps that's Calgary. But at 1.5, you can have no unprotected openings, which means no windows, no doors. It means no unvented soffit. And it means you have to fire guard that entire wall, which frustrates people that your development authority work with, because they think they can now build 5 feet off the property line, which they can, but it cannot have any openings. And that's not an issue. And the question here was whether or not we could control that in our land use bylaw. We cannot. You can't subdelegate your land use bylaw to other avenues. And it simply is something to be aware of that has, and from my experience in smaller communities, frustrates people who are told they can have a 1.5 meter side yard setback, and they may get a designer involved and they may put windows and doors in, and then the building inspector comes along later and says, you can't do that. It's something to be aware of. 1.5 is possible, but it restricts what you can build into that side yard. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Thank you for that feedback. Any other comments? Please move on.
So just hang on, Mr. Chair. So, you know, based on that feedback, is this something that we want to change then? You know, considering that building codes may have something else to say about this, and considering that we are a community that's not a major urban municipality with, you know, a full-time fire department. Just throwing that out there. And under the current, my understanding is under the current bylaw, we do allow for variances under the current rules.
Would you comment on that?
Yes, but if I could just respond to that, Mayor. So I think one thing to remember too is this is the minimum, right? So there's some rather large lots in town. You'd never build a house big enough to go to a 1.5. So some of the things been proposed in this bylaw, some smaller lot sizes. When you think about affordability, and that's what you need to do to get affordability is smaller lot sizes. And so that means a smaller house and setbacks. So I think great points by Mr. Hanlon that are important to understand, because that is a fact. It will change, but hopefully the designers, now at this point in time, because these regulations are there for a while, recognizing rural municipalities sometimes take a bit longer to catch up. They shouldn't be designing houses that have those, but it's a minimum. So at any point in time, you can certainly increase that setback if you want to have a window. If the lot's big enough, you can do that. So there won't be any restrictions on maximum sizes.
Councilor Taylor.
Through the chair to probably administration, is it advisable to perhaps put within this section, the section that says review, you know, subject to review of external building? And I hate to do that because there's so many places within the bylaw that could do that, but it to this particular point, it seems to be important.
I could, Deputy
Yeah,
Mayor.
go ahead.
I'm not sure it's gonna help. The reason I say that is most folks have their designs done before they come talk to us. They're not reading the fine print of the use bylaw, right? So, you know, it doesn't hurt, but I don't know that it's gonna provide a lot better. I think we have to trust that hopefully the industry is caught up and understands the regulations of the building code and trust that they're giving their clients good advice, right? But yeah, it's an issue for sure. It could come to, there'll be some heartache if some folks have a dream home design and they find out that they can't have a bedroom on that side of the house because can't have a window.
Anyone else comment on that? Great feedback. Okay, move on, please.
Okay, this is in regards to manufactured homes in the R2 General Residential District. So there's general concern around the ability to replace a manufactured home in the R2 district. Currently, what's proposed is an exception for the Glenwood area. It is listed as a discretionary use. So if they wanted to replace, it would be considered discretionary for that specific area. The general residential inclusion of manufactured homes as a discretionary use in all lots zoned R2 is what the ask is. We've provided a few options for council to consider. So option 1 being no change, so leaving it as that exception under the R2. Option 2 would be to allow manufactured homes to be replaced as discretionary on any of the lots beyond just the Glenwood area that had pre-existing development permits approved for a manufactured home. Option 3 is to allow manufactured homes as a discretionary use anywhere in the R2 district.
Absolutely, feedback on this. Go ahead, Mr.
Just like good deputy mayor, just for clarity, because I think this came up in the public hearing or maybe during our first committee of the whole when we introduced the draft bylaw. Important to recognize the definition for manufactured home in the proposed bylaw is basically what we call mobile home to previously. It's one of the units that's on a chassis and can be moved. So it's not an RTM ready to move home. It's not that. It's a mobile home. So just be sure that that's the clarity for everybody.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Yeah, through the chair to council administration. I think that the intent wasn't to allow the mobile home or how the one you just defined throughout the community in R2. It was more for my fear is if somebody has a home currently and they have a mobile type structure and that's what they're insured for, and then they lose their home, they can't go and build a stick built. Their insurance will cover to replace what they have, and that's. I don't want anybody to be in that position because we change all the zoning and all of a sudden they're now homeless and they can't afford that. Now we're in a pickle. So I think I'm liking option 2, if I'm correct, if that's you already have an existing mobile home on that structure, your neighbors are used to your structure. If something happens to it, you're just gonna replace it with a new one. And I'm assuming that when we replace these with new ones, there's a certain provision on actual age of those structures.
So that's the intent of that option, yes.
Councilor Taylor.
Yeah, through the chair, I agree with Councilor's point. He actually took the comments right out of my notes here. And I agree, if their mobile manufactured home burns down, they'll get replacement value on that. They won't be able to afford to build a home for that. So replacing it with other manufactured only makes sense. I agree, option 2 is the best.
Just comment on option 2, because depending on the age of the home, 14, 16 wides are not popular anymore. So you may be living in a 14 wide and you go, oh, you want a specially built home, so you're custom building a smaller home. So as long as there's some discretion to what it's saying, you had a modular home and you can replace a modular home, but not restricting to the size that's open.
Yeah.
Is that the way it reads now?
Yeah, I don't think there's any other regulations or restrictions. You're basically just based on the setbacks of that district. So if they wanted to, if they could fit a double wide on that lot, fine.
Okay, because option 3 is just a comment on their allowing it because some of the areas just what people think as a mobile home is no longer. Like there's some homes that have been placed on that you would never know the difference. So it depends on definition because what's saying steel frame burnt, you can't even buy a home with steel anymore. So 2 is good, and there was another comment. Councillor Chechka.
Through the chair to administration, do we have a restriction or a rule on if someone were to replace their manufactured home, the age that manufactured home has to be, you know, like in 1960s or maybe 2020?
But we did in the current bylaw.
So I think, and others can correct me, but I think it's again, it's Alberta building code. There's actually a safety code standard for. Yeah, yeah, Mr. Hanlon might have that.
Go ahead, Mr. Hanlon.
The joys of small communities. Sir, through you to the members, so what we think of mobile homes, as you said, metal chassis, they can date back into the 50s and 60s. Manufactured housing is specific and it is to the Canadians. So it's built to a CSA standard. I believe when you talk now manufactured homes, I believe it's 1997 is when they came into effect. So essentially you had mobile homes up until that point. Manufacturers transitioned in 1997. So I believe unless you were to put an age restriction, which some municipalities do into their land use bylaw, then the development authority would be considering a manufactured home, which is going to be 1997 or newer.
That was one of my questions. Thank you for clarifying that. Is there an age restriction because you may have 1997 a brand new site because that's all you can afford. And then just clarification, it doesn't have to be burned. You might say, hey, I want an old one. I can replace it with it. Yeah, perfect. Any other questions on this topic? Move on, please. Please. I don't think there's any more. Oh, did you have one? Go ahead.
Well, I just want to make sure that they, yeah, every in the consensus was what?
Option 2, yeah.
Option 2, sorry, yeah. Option 2.
Thank you for that.
Okay, this next one is in relation to accommodating both business and residential on the same parcel for lots fronting 4th Ave in the Glenwood subdivision. So currently with the proposed draft land use bylaw, these are being changed from R1 to business industrial light. However, there's a concern that this will cause non-conforming uses due to the existing residential that may exist on these lots. So there are a couple options here for council's consideration. The first option is to change those lots to R2, so general residential. This would mean that those that have businesses on their property or wish to add business operations would instead need approval of a home business. This will address concerns about the non-conforming residential and be consistent with the remainder of Glenwood. However, just to note, the home business use is limited to those businesses that are less intense in nature and usually a scale that does not have any substantial impact to the residential character of the neighborhood that they operate in. So just something to note. With the option 2, that is to change these lots to direct control open, so DCO. And for the interim, until administration has the opportunity to work with these property owners to determine an appropriate district, this district allows council to exercise control over development. This will remove any non-conformance matters and give time again for administration to do a fulsome review and work with the landowners to develop perhaps a distinct land use district that can address both current states and future aspirations of those that are living in this area. Something to note as well, the Development Authority can make decisions on accessory structures and home-based businesses within a direct control. So that will help in terms of timing if there are things that might be considered a bit less intense in nature. Under this direct control, there still is the ability to have approvals coming from the development officer. And this changing to this direct control is not going to take away any of the rights of those current landowners. It will, however, potentially add some processing time, again, for anything beyond the accessory structures or home-based businesses, by having to go to council for a decision on everything. Additionally, because everything would be treated sort of on a case-by-case basis, it might provide less certainty or predictability for applicants. But again, this is being proposed as an interim until we have the opportunity to look into this further. So those are the two options that we're hoping to discuss.
Councillor Sitchney.
Yeah, through the chair to administration and so forth. I actually like option 2. It gives us the flexibility on it, because my fear in the Glenwood section is we're fixing an area on 4th Avenue down by 46th and so forth, because people can't sell and replace their homes, and we're creating that exact same problem up in Glenwood. So for now, direct control, there's not a lot of stuff happening there. The home-based business, I don't think would work for some of the businesses that are currently in there. And that would be another problem to begin with. So I'm okay with direct control. I don't, we have a lot of direct control anymore. So I'm definitely not opposed to doing that. And then work with the landowners in the area to come up with a different plan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So that was my question, is that if we did option 1, would the existing businesses be compliant under the home-based business category? And so if not, then I think probably option 2 would be the better option at this point until we can delve into this further to ensure that it's existing there, which some of those businesses and homes have been there for a long time. I don't think it is appropriate for us to, change the rules of the game at this point for those properties. Just my point of view.
Through the chair, the council administration, I agree. I like option 2. The only thing I would like to see is that, when we have these discussions for a fuller discussion to see what we finally end up, but perhaps we set a timeline. And I know we're looking at, when we do pass the land use bylaw, to review it again in a year, that this section be brought back within that time frame as well. I just don't want to make it direct control and have it sit there for the next 10 years and we've never addressed what should fully be. So agree with option 2, just to bring it back within the year.
Thank you. My comment is I like option 2, but I would disagree with Councillor Taylor, because there's not a lot of development goes on in there, but I do get the concern, like the mayor's comment. Some of them have been there for 40 some years. And this, I believe, would be acceptable to people in Glenwood, at least direct control. It gives us options and time without holding it up. And I think that would be the most acceptable offer. And then we can go case by case. I believe would be the best thing to time for this area.
If I could, Deputy Mayor, so absolutely, this would be on our list to do within the first year, but it does take a bit of extra work, and we're proposing to do it post council supports this bylaw, just because it's going to be complex. You're right, some of these properties, I think they were developed under the zoning under the ID, so we'd have to do a bunch of research on what approvals were there and what exists there today, and consult with the landowners. I almost see that this would end up being a regulated direct control in the future. So a specific direct control just for this area that has specific regulations based on, again, what's there now, what's acceptable. We have had complaints with some conflicts because they are right backed up against Glenwood residential. So there has been some situations where there's been some concerns. So we have to address that within that direct control. But again, it's very unique. In hindsight, after hearing some feedback and sobering second thought, it probably does need a bit more time and attention to figure out how to do it. The direct control just buys us a little time, so I think that's a good option.
Do we have a consensus with council option 2? I think you got your information. Let's move on to the next one.
Okay, I believe this is the last one. I could be wrong. That happened to me last time, but I think this is the last one. So this is in relation to security suites. So, this is it's something that came up quite often in the public hearing. We had written submissions that spoke specifically to this. So there's a concern around existing properties that do currently have security suites with their industrial operations. So a desire to see residential continue to be allowed in industrial districts through the provision of security suites with no size restrictions. One important piece to note, there's a few things that we've looked at to help clarify The current land use bylaw calls them surveillance suites. And it does define them as subordinate and temporary, and they're not intended to become the primary residence on the site. So really, these are specifically to accommodate a person or people that their official function is really to provide surveillance or maintenance or security for the development. So again, you can imagine someone doing an overnight shift. So it really isn't intended to create a situation where there might be individuals that are living permanently on a site that has industrial operations on it. We also looked at any relevant guiding documentation or town policy that could provide direction on this mixing of industrial and residential uses. The MDB policy does speak specifically to surveillance suites, and that residential development other than approved surveillance suites shall not be permitted in industrial area. Additionally, one of our guiding principles is to follow best practice, and it's common for bylaws to prohibit the mixing of residential and industrial. Again, this is just good planning practice, as these two uses, residential and industrial, are not typically compatible, as industrial can have those adverse impacts on residences. So at this time, administration is not recommending a change, but happy to have a discussion with council on this one.
Mr. Mayor, go ahead. So I've, looked at this, considered this, and, from my point of view, I struggle, once again with changing the rules of what's been in there existing for a long time. With or without approvals, I don't know, but the fact remains that some of these places have been there for a very long time. And so, people have invested money, a significant amount of money. So if something were to happen, and they would not be able to replace their home, I'm very challenged with that. So, for me, I don't support the changes that are here. I do believe that dwellings should be continued to be allowed if they are existing on those specific properties. I don't think we should be allowing any new development. If anybody wants to build a house in these areas, I don't think that is should be allowed. But for those that are existing there, I'm really challenged with that. This is not a new issue in that area. Some of those homes have been there for a long time. And unfortunately, when they were built, there was lack of clarity in terms of the rules, lack of enforcement, and here we are today. So that's my point of view. Councilor Persist.
Yeah, through the chair. So I'm challenged as well, and I'm probably gonna echo a little bit what the mayor said, but we do have, and there's other areas in the community where we have surveillance suites where we have commercial properties, and the common practice in some places is to pull in a, as we call it, a mobile or a manufactured home. They're generally simple, pre-made, easy to pull in, or in some cases they're an ATCO trailer style that comes in. They're also probably larger than the 750. I'm not against limiting them in the future. Is there not a way we can add a provision or a clause of existing ones that if something happens to them, they can get replaced? We know we have our challenges, and again, I don't want to sit there and take anybody's home away if something happens to their home, and I would struggle with that immensely. So I'm not saying that it isn't right moving forward, that if somebody wanted to buy a raw piece of land, put a surveillance suite in an industrial area, that's a different story. But we have situations within our community and within some of these areas that are identified that we have existing structures and existing places where people are in place. So is there a way we can have sub clauses or clauses along those lines, or is it, I'm just maybe curious on that side.
Oh, there we go. Go ahead.
Through the chair, yeah, just a few comments. with that, I mean, it would be similar to what we had discussed with the manufactured homes in the R2. So I think it would have to be specific to allowing it to be rebuilt as to what it was before, because the challenge is that the current land use bylaw does have regulations that, again, the intention of the regulations is to ensure that these surveillance suites are built for only the purpose of surveilling the site and not having residents live on the site. So it's challenging because if we include a regulation that sort of allows it to move forward under that definition, it's not necessarily aligned with, again, the intention of a surveillance suite. I completely understand the concern. I know that with this change, any of these existing uses, they're allowed to continue despite not aligning with new regulations. But I understand that the concern is if anything were to happen, I think there could be the addition of an exception similar to what we're talking about with manufactured homes. Again, I think it just could be challenging to define them as a surveillance suite when in reality some of these might not necessarily be compatible with that definition or that intent. But I would welcome Mr. Kitlett's comments as well too.
Well, I can let council.
Councilor Taylor.
Yeah, through the chair to council and administration. I agree with the intent of what is written there, that we shouldn't see residential dwellings in the industrial area. That being said, I cannot and will not ignore the number of people that have come forward that have addressed concerns, appropriate concerns that, they could potentially lose their home in the future. I agree. I think we're going to have some provision in some way that any existing residences or surveillance suites or whatever they are in the industrial area as such may remain. I don't know how that's written in the future. I don't know, but it is my recommendation that we put something in there, whether we need a special resolution of council. I have no idea. And I look forward to administration to sort of investigate what best idea we can formulate to do that. But I think that is the best plan moving forward. Again, like a number of people, most of our public hearing was filled with those concerns. And I don't think we'd be doing our job as a council if we didn't hear those concerns and say we need to act upon them. So, and I do appreciate everyone who came forward and wrote letters and came here a few weeks ago to say those concerns. So again, though, moving forward, there will be no new residences in the industrial. That's not happening in the future. If you wish to purchase land there, it is for industrial use. So,
Mr. Kitlitz, and then I have a comment on that one.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So certainly can appreciate the challenge with this. It is hard to deal with legacy issues in certain situations. It's hard for us as land use professionals because this is against everything we work for. Just they're not compatible land uses, so it's a tough one without question. First off, just to address Councillor Taylor's point about not being allowed in the future at present. So the initial version of this bylaw did not include security suites as a discretionary use in BI2. After some discussion and feedback from some of the landowners, we did add it as a discretionary use. So moving forward, someone could in a BI2 area, the landowner could apply for a security suite as a discretionary use. They have to meet provisions of this bylaw, which means it couldn't be over 700 square feet. And that's in all BI2, sorry. So just make sure that's clarity. So I think it might not be fair to say that you can't do anything right now. The proposed, unless council changes that as well, but the proposed does allow for a regulated security suite. Could we include an exception clause in BI2? Yeah, I guess that's an option. As Mr. Toby said, essentially the two options that we gave for the Glenwood lots along for that, it's kind of the same thing. You can go to DCO there, which I don't think would be a good idea at all. it does work with Glenwood, but I don't think it would work with this area. This is a planned industrial area. Council's NDP adopted in 2016 has identified this industrial area. Yeah, if it's the will of council to include an exception clause, but from what I'm hearing is that if there were existing approvals for a suite in this area historically, that if they need to be rebuilt, they would be able to rebuild based on that. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Just, and I'll get back. Not only rebuilt, like don't be burnt down. In some cases, a guy may say, I want to upgrade, because some of the properties were there that would have a use of a mobile home. And I go, oh, my mobile homes is there because some of the businesses, it suits regardless. I agree on one end of town, you can't, but some of these home-based businesses they're running suit the need that it'll be my home and run a business because the business sort of fits with their home. And there's several like that, and using their imagination. I hate to see, nope, we don't want to do it in the future because there is some large properties in town and depending on the nature of their business, they may fit to be their resident. So I'm agreeing that what's there now, we don't want to, allow them to rebuild, but I don't want to see a restriction because some of the large parcels of land suit what the person's doing to be their home and a home business.
So respectfully, Deputy Mayor, I disagree. That even makes me cringe even more. This is an industrial area. And specifically to the south side of town, we included in the package the 450 meter landfill setback, provincial regulations for people not to live next to a landfill. It's not helpful to live next to a landfill. It's not supported. So that's even a bigger struggle for us as land use planners. Suggesting that I could build a brand new house out there because I want to upgrade my house. That's a stretch. Sorry, I struggle with that.
Oh. Come back. It's back. Councilor Cheska, go ahead. Before that comes back.
Thanks, through the chair to council and admin. This is a hard one. People are emotionally invested and I have no idea what the rules were before my time here and whether there were permits or not, I have no idea. I do have to, when I was looking at the package and Mr. Kidlitz just said it, the 450 meter setback from the landfill. I kind of forgot about that. I didn't forget about it, but didn't really think that it was something that needed to be considered as far as, a dwelling or living out there. And I'll admit a year ago, we did a temporary, housing, camp, approved one. And I had a hard time with that one. When all the industry came forward and said, oh, don't live next to us. Yeah, no, that's bad. We don't recommend it. And we did it anyways, because it was temporary and there was nowhere to stay. So we did it. But I struggle with that one. And on a permanent basis, I'm not comfortable with the landfill part either. But I also don't want to kick anyone out of their home or say they can't live there. Because I think that that's really hard as well. When people invested everything into their properties. Is there anything, and I'm not sure if this exists, but if the title changes that is no longer now an allowed use, I don't know if that's considered grandfathering or how that works, but the people that own the titles now that have those places that are there now, that they can remain as functioned, and if it burns down, they can put on a new one or whatever. But as soon as that title changes, now that's then non-conforming and they would have to, use the current regulations, I guess. Is that something that's manageable or possible? I don't know how that works because I struggle with that landfill part. And then if you were to actually get a permit, if the province even allows you to get a permit for that, I don't know how that works. And then if we had to ask all the local industry around there too, right? Is living, does your industrial business support residents living near there or living next to it 24/7? So I had a hard time with the last one, but because it was temporary, I was able to get past that. But this is a permanent thing, so I don't want to kick people out of their homes, absolutely not. But I also don't want to see it to continue into the future.
So.
through-
Good, oh, sorry, go ahead. Thank you.
I was just gonna say, through the chair, just to the comment around if titles change, a non-conforming use can continue, anything that's pre-existing, so it can continue. It doesn't necessarily, if you purchase a property that is non-conforming, it doesn't automatically trigger the need. So I just wanted to clarify that one piece. Sorry, go ahead.
And I was just gonna add that we'd have to look into that. I don't know that I've ever come across anything like that in my past. I don't know, Mr. Hammond, if you have, but we'd have to look into that.
Go ahead, Mr. Dillon.
Sir, through the members of the committee, I can share with you that a county not too far from you unknowingly approved a subdivision within the setbacks to an old capped landfill. They then proceeded to knowingly allow the registration of the subdivision and the development of lots in that subdivision. They are now purchasing those lots back from subsequent owners because they're not allowed to be there. And that county isn't happy, and the current administration is not happy. I appreciate what I've heard about the feelings and the emotions and all of that. Years from now with subsequent ownership, the feelings and the emotions respectfully don't matter. The municipality knowing that these have occurred, and I don't know if any of these are within the 450 meters, respectfully, I don't think we know that here tonight. I'm looking at the aerial, they're very close. So that's just something to be cognizant of and aware about the liability that we carry going forward. And Mr. Kittlett speaks to land use professionals and planners. It is a big concern for us. It is not just what's right for residents and landowners, but also the liability and the protection of the municipality.
Just to clarify, actually, Councillor Cheska brought up a very good point. In some of these home-based businesses, maybe the value, just saying, okay, I'm running a business and when it changes hands, it's the value. So it's a home-based business with this dwelling on it, and you built it to that. So that is a very good question. Can it carry on? Because you may decide to sell it as such with the same rules.
Well, it's all respect, Deputy Mayor, that's a different situation. We aren't talking about home-based businesses right now. We're talking about residential land uses in an industrial area, a major industrial area. So
Well,
they're two separate things.
Well, some of them we're talking about are technically running a business. That's what I'm concerned about. Go ahead, Councillor.
I was actually gonna touch on Mr. Killis was talking about. We're not talking about home-based businesses. We're talking about stuff that were approved as surveillance suites that are existing today as a surveillance suite under the old system. If I think the math is right, south of the tracks, they have 3. Is that right?
For clarity, I think we looked at this closer on the digital, and one is just north of the pink line, so it's outside of the 450. And to our knowledge, 2 are within 2.
So now, is there a possibility that we can, because there's 2 structures there, currently occupied, to my understanding, that they can put a provision in that if they were only those 2 or whatever burned down, they lost their home, they could be replaced. I'm not against the process moving forward. So if someone wants to open the town of Edson, let's say we open up the lands to the east of the landfill and we want to put a security suite in, we're tied by the provisions that we have forward. I believe in the security suite because we all know, unfortunately, the way the world is today, people put people on their sites because otherwise stuff gets stolen. So I just wanted, we're talking about a couple of people or a couple of buildings right now that would not be able to be replaced with the new bylaw. So is there a way we can, very similar to the trailers and stuff in the other area, I'm not asking about replacement, as if they lose their home to a fire, for example, can they replace them? And I know they're surveillance, we call it a surveillance suite, but that's all I'm concerned about at this point. And again, if they do lose their home, they may not even, if the province is involved, they may not get provisions anyway, but it's one of those things that I would like to make sure that we're not handcuffing somebody's property.
I can
Go ahead, Mr.
I'm gonna go for another comment. I want you.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So, Deputy Mayor, so, couple points. So, again, an exception clause that, similar to what I talked about, where there wasn't approval previously. We could certainly craft something for that. But I guess one thing I want to make sure, a couple things that everyone needs to be clear about. This is a discretionary use. So even the replacement of one that burnt down, The adjacent landowners in that area would have the right to appeal. In my experience, heavy industrial landowners don't want residential properties in their neighborhood. So you can bet you might get an appeal and it may not get through an SDAB anyway. So there's a risk there. Secondly, I can pretty much guarantee, I'm not sure what happened previously. Maybe the Alberta landfill setbacks weren't in place at the time. But anything new that would go in there, the surveillance suite, security suite would classify as a residential, I think they call it a residence. I got legal opinion on this. Would have to meet those requirements. Now, there is a variance option that the Alberta government does provide for setbacks from landfills, but we can't guarantee that that'll be approved. So we can put a provision in, but there's other things at play here that may have a factor on a future decision.
Through the chair, so again, I go back, yes, I'm in favor of an exception, but there has to be something that the residents in that area have to be aware of. That we can guarantee as a municipality that perhaps that exception, that if your home burns down, we can rebuild it. However, there are other authorities in place, namely the province, that we can't guarantee. And that's the challenge. And I know Mr. Hallen's gonna maybe ask, oh yeah, I thought you were gonna respond to that in a sec. So there is a risk to the residents that live, and I hope that you understand that risk. That we may allow that exception, but if tragically something were to happen, we say yes, if the province says no, we may not be able to do anything about that. And now, Mr. Hanlon, you have a comment of I may have misinterpreted things, so.
Sir, through you to the members of the committee. No, you did not misinterpret. I just wanted to clarify because I've heard it a couple of times. If something were to come forward for reconstruction in the future, it would not be a decision of the province of Alberta. The setback regulations to active or inactive or capped landfills are simply administered by the local municipality. So we have to respect that. It's not that the province would come in and make a decision on this. We have to respect these setback regulations. And Mr. Clitlis is quite correct. There are mechanisms that may allow variance to that, but it is ultimately going to be the municipality that makes the decision based on those governing regulations that we have to take into account.
Any other questions? Councilor Precision. Yeah, through the chair to administration. So there's other factors at play, and I'm aware of that. I'm okay. I'd still like to see a clause from our end. If in the future something occurs and the STBA board gets appealed and something doesn't go ahead, well, that's not on us. That's we've done our part. So as far as I'm concerned, we can put the provisions in and then let the future be what the future be. We may never even have to cross this bridge because nothing may never ever happen, and it'll be the status quo for another 50 years. So got a lot of trees to stop fire from going through there. So we may not have to cross this bridge, but I just don't want to be the person that decided that we'll leave it to those other powers that be.
Councilor Taylor.
To the chair, I agree with Councilor positioning, right? And again, as long as residents in that area are understanding of the risks in the future that those things may occur that go beyond the control of this council. So as long as you understand, individuals understand that, the individuals came forward in the public hearing, and I agree with allowing the exception.
Okay. Do you have enough information from council, or do you have questions for us, Mr. Mayor?
So I agree with what Councilor Pacicci says. So I know our focus of the topic of discussion has been around the landfill, but there is a residence just directly north. Is that outside of the 450?
Yeah. To you, Deputy Mayor. So based on our desktop analysis, looking at the map a bit closer, it looks like the one residence is, and I think that was done purposely. I think that was a recent permit that was just done a couple of years ago. So that one is outside of the 450.
So just to follow up, if I may, so would that residents, if something were to happen, be able to rebuild under the rules that are provided, because it is it was permitted?
As of right now, it's a security suite, and it would have to be the maximum 700 square feet. So I believe the unit there now is larger than 700 square feet, so it would not be able to be bigger than that. Now, if what I'm hearing, council wants administration to consider is an exception clause, and I'll try to phrase it here and see if this is along the lines that we're looking for. There's somewhere along the lines, if a security suite that exists in a B2, this is BI2, so that whole district, whether it's in the south part of town or northeast, if one existed and had previous approval under the previous land use bylaw, it's considered a discretionary use perhaps, and can be applied for to rebuild. Similar size, I guess, might be a way to put it. Maybe you can build a like same square footage, or maybe it needs to have a provision that says in the same location, so they can't relocate it to maybe a different part of the site that they like more. It might just be replace the same thing on the same footprint. So we could provide a clause, something along those lines. Is that what I'm hearing council would like to see?
I think we're all in agreement. That's fair. Councillor Judgment.
Through the chair to Mr. Kidlitz, how many dwellings, for secondary suites or surveillance suites, security suites, do we have in other areas of town? Like, do you know of any off the top of your head? I'm trying to think, and I'm not calling.
No, I don't know that.
There is other ones in the community. There's some up on Rodeo Road.
In
Yeah.
industrial areas?
Yeah,
There's a large shop that has a trailer in behind it.
right.
There's quite a few.
There's a few in the industrial areas, because, and a lot of them come about because they put staff in there and so forth, because they had, and once you. And it's well known in the community is once you put in a surveillance suite, your crime seems to go away because there's somebody living there. So. That's why it's important to have a surveillance suite clause in there, just because they are functional.
Go ahead.
Through to the rest of the committee, I think you can appreciate how challenging this item is for administration to bring forward professional advice with regards to what best practices, and this does challenge our planning professionals. This is against everything, and it's not about we don't try to make these rules in place to be preventative for our residents, etc. But we're here to provide you with the advice that we are required to, in a sense. And that's, if we're not providing you the advice and the information, then we're not doing our job. So we want to make sure that council has all the information in order to make the best decision possible.
Thank you for that comment. I'll speak for myself that I agree what you're telling us. So we do take that, but then what we're saying is we hear from the public. So that's what we're doing. We're weighing up the options. So I respect what administration is telling us, but we're listening to the public as well. Any more comments on this issue? I think we're all about to, is one more or just go ahead.
I just want to ask if back here, Laura, I need to close up before I have a closing comment. Is there anything you want to add or share?
No, I don't think so. I think you, done a good job at sort of communicating the concerns just based on best planning practice. But I think we have a good understanding of the direction moving forward.
So,
One more.
Through the
One
chair
more
to
question.
administration, with any of the changes that we're looking at today, I know you had mentioned earlier about it possibly triggering another public hearing. Is that something we're looking at leaving this, or are we the changes we're looking at tonight comfortable with proceeding to first reading?
Great question. So I think we've talked about this a lot as a team, trying to do our own sort of analysis. We're prepared to go for a legal opinion if needed. I think what we talked about as recent as today is, I think everything that we presented here today, with maybe exception of the one about the highway laws going from R1 to R2, which is probably something that we didn't really cover off in the public hearing. We heard it in the info session and we've been batting it around, but I don't think it necessarily came up specifically. Everything else was presented at the public hearing. So all this information isn't new. It's not a new item that we brought to light today. So our general consensus, I think we're okay. But we'll absorb a little bit. I'm not sure how council feels, if they want to provide us some direction otherwise, but I think we're okay. We will probably consult with our legal opinion just to get another thought on it, but I think we're pretty solid unless council feels otherwise.
Just,
Yeah, do one
I'd be
follow-up.
comfortable with, I was consulting with legal, and if they say we can proceed to first reading.
Go ahead.
So I guess I just wanted to wrap this up. I think we went through all of the feedback. We hope we caught it all. We certainly spent a lot of time with all the feedback and letters and trying to catch everything. Basically, if we heard the consensus from council to support the recommendation, we'll make changes to reflect that. And then obviously with the last items respecting security suites, we'll add a clause in that provides that exception for existings. And we'll incorporate all those into a final draft. And it'll either be presented for first reading, or if we get advice to have a public hearing, we'll do that same. I think the advice we'll get though is the public hearing will be specific for anything that's substantively changed. It shouldn't be an opportunity to open up the whole book again, because otherwise we'll just continue in a circle, right? So I think we'll get that clarity, but we'll be coming back with a final draft that for council to consider.
Just clarification, yeah, how much time do we have before we have to have another public hearing? Because we're saying you're bringing it back, so that this will come to us in how many council meetings from now? Our next one, first of May, is that our deadline?
For clarity, we haven't determined yet about the public hearing. If we do, the statute requirements are a 2-week notification for a public hearing. So if we have to hold a public hearing, we're probably not doing it till second meeting in May. Would be the earliest, and that'll even be a challenge because we have to have a final document prepared for that. So it'll delay it a month for sure. So if we have to have another public hearing, it'll be another month away before we can even get it released. So if not, we can probably turn this around and have a bylaw in front of council for first reading. I think May 21st, is that the council meeting? Second council meeting in May.
Yep.
Okay, we got all the questions wrapped up. So we don't have to extend time. At this time, we're right on to questions from media or public regarding what we discussed today. Anything from the media first? Nothing from media. So if you have a question, please state your name and we'll do it as question. It is not a debate, but I do want to hear your question.
Sure. Diana Chalmina.
Okay.
It's a land use bylaw. I'm not sure if it was addressed tonight. So my property is, I believe, residential acreage. It was changed from direct control to residential acreage, and the size of the lots for that area, the maximum it stated, I think it was half an acre.
So what I'm gonna do in your case, I know what property you're talking about.
Right.
I'm gonna direct you to come back to administration. Because I think I know which property you're talking about, but you know, where you have till May 21st. So I believe,
I was actually just wondering,
yeah,
my lot is actually a smaller lot in that area. And I was just wondering, why the maximum lot size was set for half an acre?
if we could answer that.
You know, it's worked out by Skyview.
Very sure it's R1.
I don't, I think R2. So
It might be best if you came and visited or we talk about it after that, we can pinpoint, because I don't want to give you advice or say something that's not correct. So we probably want to pinpoint your lot. One of the things that maybe is a good point to bring out, with respect to lot dimensions and lot sizes. So there is a provision in this bylaw. 4.12 talks about for all parcels of residential district created prior to the adoption of this bylaw. The development authority may vary the requirements of this bylaw to issue a development permit despite the parcels non-conforming to the dimension requirements. So what it's trying to say is, because of this fact, there's some parcels that are quite odd shaped out there. We're not gonna apply them strictly when it comes to future development because of that. So there's a provision in there to deal with that, but certainly we can
that
sell
was
it.
my actual question too, like
Yeah.
if it stayed the same, would there be anything, like if we sold it, would it be a problem for someone who purchased it? So through.
I'll get They don't like the term, but because you're existing, it's like it's grandfathered. So you were rezoned to the size you are, so you'll be in compliance.
Okay, and so that would be even moving forward to next, okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Anyone else have a question or concern?
Your lot size will be in compliance. I should have specified that. If you build a deck without a permit, you won't be in compliance.
Go ahead, state your name and we can answer your question.
Christine Bateser. I'm in Glenwood. I'm on just on the highway. So if I sell my property, if I understand it right. And I sell the property and the house is there, and if it's burns, the next owner can rebuild?
I believe we're gonna have to put that back in administration. That's the direction we're going.
Yeah.
So I'll
Yes.
pass that to administration. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
Okay.
permits.
Permits. Yeah, do we have any more questions? Thank you for your. I think well. Okay, Clayton wanted to hit a button, we would finish an hour sooner, but thank you, Clayton. If there's no one online? No. Okay, thank you guys all, and then we're gonna look for, don't know how to do a motion for adjournment. Mr. Mayor, all those in favor? And did everyone have Girl Guide cookies?